Hello everybody and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program Beyond Horizons. Cerbus and Jolford return to the Valkyrie after their brave excursion on the surface of Duna, and I'm sure they're excitedly telling Elming and Beebin all the exciting stories of what they got up to down there. There's still more work to be done in the Dunian system. We have a lander destined for Ike, which will rendezvous with the Valkyrie and take some astronauts there as well, but we'll do that at another time. For now, we're checking back in with Megan and Seapond Kerman, who are doing their expedition of science round Minmus. Next up, they are heading to the pole, so, well, let's just watch them head over there now. Now, at this point, I was kind of worried about how much fuel I had, because it's running a little low there, and I was like, do I have time to stop off at one more biome? Luckily, there is the flats on the way back to Foxglove, so I thought maybe I just have enough fuel to stop off here. Now, I'm pretty sure this means that we haven't done every single biome on Minmus, and since this is out of fuel, we'll probably have to send up either a replacement, or maybe we can just leave it since we have all the experiments running back at the station. Then again, maybe we do need to send up a replacement lander, because Seapon and Megan have grown quite accustomed to landing on the moons of Kerbal, and I don't think they want to stop just yet. But either way, we'll worry about that later, because for now we have important flag planting duties to do. After this quick excursion, Megan and Seapond will head back to Foxglove, and they'll transfer all of the surface samples into the science lab so that they can be processed and the information be sent back to home base so we can invest in new technologies and get cooler and bigger rockets. Or alternatively, we could take the science points and invest them in state-of-the-art computing. So I learned today in my Fourier and Optics module that transistors can get to be as small as like 3 nanometers, which is an insane scale. And you know, that does sort of make sense, because the process that these transistors are made on, like big processors and things like that, is through a process called photolithography, which essentially uses X-rays to carve out, I guess you could say, the pathways of the transistors. And X-rays are on the order of nanometers as well, although actually uses quite a lot larger wavelengths of X-rays, because these have to be shone through a sort of mask that allows the light through. And if the gap is the same size or similar size to the wavelength of light, then you get diffraction, and then you don't get a clean cut for your transistors. And as a little caveat, I'm using the word cut very liberally there. It's not really cutting, but it's a useful way to think about it. Anyway, enough yammering about all these transistors and nonsense. We're coming back to the Foxglove, and as you can see, we have literally so little fuel in the tank that I was seeing if I could just do it with the monopropellant. Which is more than enough thrust to fight the weak gravity of Minmus, so I could conserve a little bit of fuel. Fuel that I then realise I could use by saving the Kerbals a few extra steps by bringing the lander a little bit closer to the base. I mean, we definitely won't be going anywhere else in this thing, so we might as well use the tiny amount of fuel that we have left to save Megan and Seapond walking all the way over to the Foxglove. After all, they've just been around the whole of Minmus. They've been doing lots of hiking, so I bet their legs are quite sore now. And despite the low gravity probably making it a bit easier to walk around, carrying that massive spacesuit on their back probably offsets any benefit that would have. Then again, why walk when you can fly? Of course, the gravity here is so low that the jetpacks do mean you can literally just fly. Anyway, here we are. We've got Seapond transporting all of the important science over to the base so that the other scientists can get working on it. Thus concludes the scientific pilgrimage across Minmus. Unfortunately, we haven't been to all the biomes, so we will have to send another lander, but I think we'll do that when we rotate the crew. for now, Megan and Sepon can relax and just wait for the other experiments to be finished, which will take about 150 days or so, so it's going to be a while before we rotate the crew, but we'll probably check back in on them at some point just to make sure they aren't going crazy or dying. And that was the departure of Demeter on her way to Jool. She has a course correction in about 280 days, and then from there it'll take about 3 years to get out to her target, so we have plenty to be getting on with in the meantime. Which means I really have no more excuses. It's time to land on Gilly. The Orpheus arrived around Eve in episode 11, I've just realised, and so I've been putting this off for the last 9 episodes. I just really don't like landing on Gilly, it takes too long. Luckily, this time was actually quite painless compared to other times that I've done it. So we're just deploying the last of the Orpheus probes now. I realised that I forgot to put any kind of monopropellant on it, so I had to knock it out of the cargo frame there, which isn't a very official manoeuvre, but hey, it works. So normally what makes landing on Gilly so difficult is that it is incredibly small, which means its gravitational well is also incredibly small. On top of that, the orbit is extremely elliptical, so it's very hard to get an encounter in the first place, and I got very lucky here that it was coming down towards its periapsis as I was, attempting to do this, so I actually didn't have to wait too long to get an encounter. I did have to do quite a few corrections, as you'll see in a moment, just to get myself closer, but yeah, I got very lucky about when I decided to actually do this. So I guess Gilly's real-life analogues would be the moons of Mars, Phobos and Deimos, which JAXA, the Japanese space agency, as well as a bunch of other agencies, is hopefully sending a mission to them soon. And I've just been reading their information page about it and learned some pretty interesting things, like Phobos completes one orbit of Mars in 7.5 hours, which means if you were on the surface of Mars, you'd actually see it rise in the west and set in the east. And it's orbiting so close to Mars at an altitude of around 6,000 kilometers that in about 40 million years it's going to get too close to Mars, and then it'll approach something known as the Roche limit, and it'll basically get broken up into nice little rings. That'll be nice for Mars in the future. So one of the goals of this mission, which is called the MMX Mars Moon Exploration mission, is to investigate the origins of these two little moons. Because it's not exactly clear, and there are a few theories going around. So one of them is a capture theory, that they are just asteroids from the asteroid belt, or even actually from beyond the orbit of Neptune, that have been captured by Mars. Another potential theory is, I actually mentioned this a few episodes ago, that the northern hemisphere of Mars looks like a big impact crater, essentially, and so perhaps there was some big impact event that sent lots of rocks and ejecta up into the orbits of Mars, and they eventually coalesced into Phobos and Deimos. So this MMX mission will be doing lots of science to establish the origins of the little moons, experiments that might be quite similar to the ones that we are doing now. All that yapping about Phobos and Deimos, and I've barely noticed that we actually made it to Gilly, so here we are just doing our insertion burn, and then from there we will land and hopefully get some nice science. Another one of the reasons I don't visit Gilly that often is because it doesn't look very interesting. It is literally just a brown lumpy rock in orbit of Eve. Although that being said, the Parallax mod is doing some pretty heavy lifting in that regard, because it actually does make the surface look a bit more interestingly textured. I think in the base game it just looks, well, it kind of looks like a big floating piece of dung in space. Anyway, here we are coming down to the surface of Gilly. I don't know if you can call this a landing, it seems a bit too slow for that, but I left my burn till very late just because I didn't want to be hanging around. You can see here the gravitational acceleration here on Gilly is tiny, almost non-existent. But anyway, a great deal of patience later, and we finally make it down to the surface. And you'll notice that the gravity here is so weak that the SAS reaction wheels are more than strong enough to hold this thing off the ground, so it can just balance on one leg. So now it's time to start the all-important science collection, and I don't know if we will go to another biome. We definitely have the fuel for it, but I'll see how I feel later on. The Zagreus project continues, and we're getting closer to a final design here. So I've cut down the number of propellers from 4 to 2, just because I think 4 will be overkill for Eve's thick atmosphere, and we've also taken the wings in so that it'll fit inside one of the 10-meter heat shields. But unfortunately, I've not packed nearly enough electricity production, so the fuel cells that I've got here are just not enough to sustain the propellers, and so we're making an emergency landing here on the island. I think the final plane will definitely have to have a lot more in the way of storage for electric charge, just so that we don't have to continuously run the fuel cells to keep the thing flying. So yeah, unfortunately Valentina's test flight with this plane has been cut short due to the lack of charge, so she's bringing it down gently here on this island in the middle of the ocean. So hopefully the people at the tracking station know where she is so that they can come and get her. So we're making improvements to this project little by little, but we're still a ways off it being done yet. Luckily we've got quite a while before our transfer window to Eve. We wrap up today's episode by checking back in with Echo and Dust on their way to Dres. Nothing too exciting, we're just making a course correction so that we get into a nice polar encounter with the dwarf planet. Mainly because we want to make sure the lander always has good communication possibilities back with Kerbin, but also because we want the orbiter to collect the science from space above every biome. Yeah, a bit of a shorter episode today. I do apologise just because I've just been so busy with uni work. It's been pretty full on this year, so unfortunately I haven't had quite as much time to make episodes. And I had a bit of a backlog of episodes that I have now run out of, so yeah, now it's going to be making them week by week, and I just hope that I have enough time in between my busy uni schedule to make them. I'm sure I will find the time to do it. But there we are, we have a nice encounter with Dres, and we've got our orbital insertion maneuver planned for 2 years away, so it'll be a while before we check back in with this probe. And it'll be another week before we check back in with the space program, because that's all I've got time for today. If you enjoyed the episode, do consider leaving a like and maybe even subscribing to the channel. And if you enjoyed this episode and you want to catch up with older ones, you can check out the playlist that this one is in. But anyway, I've been Moonfish1001, and I'll see you in the next video.